The Blue Eyes White Dragon has historically been a complete sleeper in terms of competitive success. Even since its release in 2002, this card was almost immediately power crept by Summon Skull. Blue Eyes required one more tribute than Summon Skull, lost to the exact same removal options, and beat the exact same cards. The only niche it had was in doing slightly more damage, which was 100% not worth the resources. It was essentially a higher risk for no more reward. Over the years, the Blue Eyes archetype got a pretty big push from Konami by drip-feeding it a ton of cards that tried to make it a coherent strategy, but none of it really mattered in the competitive landscape. That is, until July of 2016. A card you could only get from the Dark Side of Dimensions movie pack hit the scene. Blue Eyes Alternative White Dragon. Alternative was a bombshell card that completely tied together all the deck's recent additions to enable a meta-dominating threat. Its effect doesn't make it seem like it'd be the core to the Blue Eyes deck. Alternative could summon itself from the hand by revealing any Blue Eyes White Dragon, and while on the field it could destroy a card at the cost of not being able to make an attack that turn. But for the next 3 months after Alternative released, Blue Eyes was the top deck of the format, rivaling Burning Abyss. It had some pretty big consistency issues, mainly due to requiring 3 vanilla monsters that did nothing on their own, but the ceiling of the deck was way higher than anything else at the time. It really can't be understated how impactful Alternative was to the Blue Eyes archetype. There was no serious Blue Eyes deck before this card. We already had Sage with Eyes of Blue, Melody of Awakening Dragon, and White Stone of the Ancients. All of these cards would be essential to the Blue Eyes deck, but them and the archetype saw no play until Alternative came out. Melody of Awakening Dragon let you pitch a card to add 2 dragons with the stat line of Blue Eyes White Dragon. This used to only get you 2 vanilla monsters with no way to summon themselves. But now with Alternative, you could grab both an Alternative and a vanilla Blue Eyes to fulfill its summoning condition. Because Alternative was just a free level 8 that you could toss on the field, your level 1 tuners like Sage and the White Stones can enable your level 9 synchro plays easier. This came with the accelerated graveyard setup for Return of the Dragon Lords that enabled game-ending rank 8 plays. The other big boon Blue Eyes received came 8 days after Alternative was released, a new ban list that got every top deck of the previous format. The Monarch strategy saw 3 of their cards going from 3 copies to 1 copy each, massively lowering the ceiling of the deck and hurting its consistency. Pendulum decks had Perform Pal Monkey Board Band and Magic Spectre Kieran limited to 1. This really lowered the grind, consistency, and ceiling of all Pendulum builds. Burning Abyss had been a top deck since Beatrice released earlier that year, but the deck's ceiling and grind was cut with Beatrice and Seer both going to 1 copy each. Cosmo had their best payoff in Cosmo Dark Destroyer, limited to 1. Emergency Teleport, which Cosmo used to find their pilots, went from semi-limited to limited as well, a big hit to their consistency and grind game. With the ban list setting the stage and Alternative tying the Blue Eyes deck together, it was time for Blue Eyes to take the spotlight. The deck had 3 big boss monsters that enabled it as a meta-dominating threat. Blue Eyes Spirit Dragon was a level 9 that you could make with Alternative or Vanilla Blue Eyes with any of your level 1 tuners. Spirit had a quick effect where it could tribute itself during the opponent's turn to special summon any Light Dragon Synchro monster from your extra deck. This was really useful for dodging removal and putting up even more interaction with your other extra deck options, like Black Rose Moonlight Dragon. It also had 2 built-in negation effects that played well into the meta at the time. It prevented any special summons of 2 or more monsters at the same time, and it could negate any effect that activated from the graveyard. These respectively dealt with both Pendulum and Burning Abyss. It could restrict Pendulum summons to only Pendulum summoning 1 monster, and stop any Burning Abyss monster from activating in the graveyard. Azure Eyes Silver Dragon was another level 9 synchro, and a potential target for Spirit Eyes' tag-out effect. Azure Eyes gave every dragon you control protection from destruction and targeting, making it really hard to remove with its big stats. It also brought back a vanilla Blue Eyes from your graveyard during each of your standby phases. This protection was tough to deal with, and Azure Eyes was gaining value every single turn by bringing back more Blue Eyes for more synchro plays or more Xyz plays. It's also likely your opponent committed a lot of resources to outing the Spirit Dragon before it tagged out into the Azure Eyes, making it one of the hardest monsters to remove in this format. So far, Spirit gave the deck flexibility and interaction, while Azure Eyes gave it a way to recur resources and get value. The last big boss monster gave Blue Eyes the ability to tear apart boards and push for game easily. Galaxy Eyes Dark Matter Dragon was part of a rank-up combo that started with Galaxy Eyes Cypher Dragon being made from any 2 level 8s. Cypher Dragon is able to steal an opponent's monster, then letting you summon Full Armor Photon Dragon on top of that stolen monster, using it as the only material. Full Armor Photon let you destroy any face-up card, then finally ranking up the Full Armor Photon into Galaxy Eye's Dark Matter Dragon. When Dark Matter is summoned, it mills 3 different dragons from your deck as part of the cost to an effect. It being the cost is insane, because even if you negated it, they still get the graveyard setup, because you can't negate the cost. Then when it's on the field, its detach effect let this 4000 attack beast hit monsters twice that turn, giving this single combo the capability of taking out 4 monsters in total. The milling effect for dragons is so strong that this card is still banned to this day and is probably never coming off, but that didn't have much to do with Blue Eyes. Blue Eyes wasn't the sole deck-topping events though. Despite all the banlist hits, Burning Abyss, Cosmo, and Pendulum decks all saw a healthy representation, along with a ton of other strategy. Burning Abyss at this point was using Phantom Knights for a rank 3 toolbox deck. Only 1 copy of Beatrice and Seer did make it harder for them to grind, but they were still putting up representation equal to that of Blue Eyes at the top tables. Cosmo was a Star Wars themed deck where you had a bunch of weak pilot cards that generated advantage with their effects. These pilots then banished themselves to some of the much stronger ships from your hand that destroyed opponents' cards and had targeting protection. They were then able to get the pilots back and repeat this process with their field spell. Even with 1 Dark Destroyer, Cosmo still saw a lot of play this format. Pendulum had 2 major representatives. Magispector was sticking around from last format, as well as the newly released Metal Foes. Magispector existed in a ton of forms, either Splash into Odd Eyes or Metal Foes, but its pure build was still going strong as a control deck that was hard to outvalue. Metal Foes was a combo archetype that focused on destroying their own cards to generate value to enable fusion and Xyz plays. They only really existed with the Magispector cards at this point though. Now, let's take a look at how this format played out in the actual games. Like I said, there's a ton of other viable options this format, but for gameplay, we're just going to be taking a look at the big contenders. Huge shoutouts to my buddy Nick for taking the time to learn these decks and play these games out with me. First up, we're going to be taking a look at Blue Eyes against the other best deck of the format, Burning Abyss. Immediately in this game, Burning Abyss is having a real hard time. This shows how strong Sage with Eyes of Blue and Alternative were. Sage is a level 1 tuner that allows you to set up the Spirit Dragon, but its effect on normal summon lets it search an Effect Veiler for even more disruption. The Spirit Dragon is threatening all Burning Abyss and Phantom Knights effects from the graveyard, but even after forcing out the negation, Spirit still has its tag-out effect into Black Rose Moonlight Dragon to return a card to the hand. Then, after pushing through all of that, Burning Abyss's follow-up is stopped by the Effect Veiler that they search for the Sage, leaving them on an unimpressive board. On the Crackback, Blue Eyes can bring back the Spirit to further threaten graveyard interactions. Burning Abyss manages to stall for a turn, but even with the best top deck possible, they just can't clear this Spirit, which keeps forcing out more resources from the Burning Abyss deck. The Blue Eyes player can easily go through the Galaxy Eyes line and end on a Dark Matter to tear apart the board and leave 2 huge threats that need to be cleared. Luckily, PK is able to do that, but they are just out of gas at this point with no more plays left, and they really just can't keep up with the value and recursion that Blue Eyes has at this final stretch of the game. There's only so many times they can deal with these huge stat sticks and negations until they just run out of gas. Next, we'll be taking a look at Blue Eyes against Magispector, Metal Foes. Magifo's hands were a little slow at this point in the game. They're unable to set up any interaction past an Effect Veiler. Blue Eyes is able to take full advantage of this tempo swing and sets up a Spirit. Similar to the BA matchup, we can see just how strong the Spirit Dragon's restriction of the special summoning multiple monsters is. Magifos is forced to Pendulum Summon for just 1 to threaten the Spirit, and by that point, they don't need the Floodgate effect and can tag out for an Azure Eyes, which protects their board and gives them even more value over the course of the game. Meanwhile, they can still just clear all the back row by activating Dragon Spirit of White multiple times. From this position, making Dark Matter is more than enough to set up lethal with a bit of flexing. Finally, we're going to look at 2 other decks of this format, Mermail and Cosmo. Cosmo, as a classic control deck, sets 5 and passes. Mermail is pretty explosive with high OTK potential, but there's a lot of choke points in the deck, like with Abyss Megalo getting Solemn Striked here. Even though Mermail can try to force out the entire back row for 1 turn, they don't have any good follow-up and an end board without any interaction. Cosmotown is able to loop the Farm Girl, which is going to give them so many cards that Mermail is constantly playing from behind the entire game. And that will be their downfall, being unable to establish any kind of board of their own. August of that year, Blue Eyes would go on to win the World Championship 2016 tournament. Hilariously, the final game of this tournament was a Blue Eyes mirror match, where one player hard bricked and the only monster he summoned was setting a hand trap to try and survive one more turn. For the next 3 months after Alternative was released, Blue Eyes was dominating tournaments. But other new threats were slowly being rolled out that contended with Blue Eyes. Late October of that year, the Kaiba structure deck rolled out with a new ABC archetype. This completely took over Blue Eyes as the deck to beat. This deck is crazy. It had the explosive potential of a combo deck with the insane value of a mid-range deck. It could pump out high-value rank 4s and contact fuse by banishing monsters from the grave for their boss monster, ABC Dragon Buster. Dragon Buster gave them a banish as a quick effect each turn, and whenever that Dragon Buster was threatened, it could bring back all the materials that was used for its summon, each of which gained value when they're sent to the graveyard. So after making all those pieces into more rank 4s, they're back in the graveyard and can be used for another contact fusion of another Dragon Buster. Invasion Vengeance would drop just a few weeks after that, and gave us Totally Awesome, which enabled decks like Hero, Lightswarm, and Paleozoic Frogs. Invasion Vengeance also came with 4 new metal foes, including Bismugear and Mithrilium, giving the deck an insane power boost, making it the second best deck of that format. Even with all these other decks getting new tools, Blue Eyes was still a solid option, but I think it's best described as a tier 2 deck at this point. Of course, there are a bunch of other cool strategies running around, but for gameplay, we're going to be taking a look at these 4 decks. First, we'll look at the new best deck, ABC, take on Blue Eyes. Bujin Tsukiyomi lets ABC draw a ton of cards while setting up their graveyard for the Dragon Buster play later. Making this Abyss Dweller with the insanely overpowered Norden locks Blue Eyes out of any graveyard effects like their White Stones. And being able to make Dragon Buster out of materials from the graveyard that you've already used this turn to get value was just such a strong mechanic at this time of the game. Dragon Buster could easily banish the alternative in any play starters the Blue Eyes player can get. And because that alternative was banished, they can't get it back with Return of the Dragon Lords. They instead have to set up their graveyard using almost their entire hand to go through the Galaxy Eyes Xyz monsters to only clear half the board. And now you can just see the real power of this deck. Even after clearing the Dragon Buster, all of its materials go to the grave so they can be banished for another contact fusion. Meanwhile, using those resources while they were on the field to draw a ton of cards. Since Dragon Buster is only a soft once per turn, you can actually set up 2 for 2 different banishes during the opponent's turn. It'd be hard for any deck to play through this, let alone Blue Eyes on 3 cards, and that's going to spell the end for the game. Next, we'll look at the new Paleo Frog control deck against the now improved Metal Foes combo deck. Paleo had quite a few pieces of interaction, but nothing to have contest the Pendulum Summon that gives an Omni-Negate with Cyber Dragon Infinity, removal with Metal Foes Mithrilium, and interaction during the Paleo turn with full Metal Foes Fusion. Even playing through the Infinity Negate, Paleo is constantly playing from behind. They manage to survive, but they're just losing more and more value to Pendulum with the pace they're going at. More and more resources from Paleo are just forcing Pendulum cards to the Pendulum deck face up for the Pendulum Summon next turn. With their resources, they can easily force out the Totally Awesome before their Pendulum Summon, which really seals the deal for this game as Pendulum is able to take lethal. Finally, we're looking at the mid-range-ish Heroes deck versus the Lightsworn combo deck. Heroes set up their primary boss monster, Masked Hero Dark Law, forcing Lightsworn to take awkward lines so they still have graveyard resources to extend their plays. Just to force out the Dark Law, they're left with a vanilla monster on field, 2 cards in hand, and no graveyard setup. Hero's other boss monster that they just gained comes out and Totally Awesome, this time backed up by Floodgate Trap Hole and Book of Eclipse. I don't think there's any combination of 3 cards in the game that does it for Lightsworn here, as Heroes can set up another Toad after negating the Minerva floating effect and easily taking lethal. Today, Blue Eyes sees no competitive play whatsoever and hasn't for years. So what eventually did Blue Eyes in? Well, it wasn't any sweeping ban list that crippled it. It was February 2017 that brought us Raging Tempest and the Zodiac cards. Zodiac cemented a new meta where Blue Eyes only saw rogue play at best with the Invoked engine that came out in Fusion Enforcers that February. The Zodiac cards kind of reached a level of power that almost no other decks at the time could keep up with. And if these cards were still unlimited today, a lot of decks right now probably couldn't keep up with the Zodiac cards. But even after Zodiac got hit, eventually, Blue Eyes just kind of fell off over time. Invoked had way better options for supplementary engines than Blue Eyes. New Blue Eyes cards are still being released to this day, with a few of them being pretty strong individual cards. But none have ever propped up this deck to meta relevance like Alternative did back in 2016. Now, it only exists as apparently the only deck you'll ever face in Gold in Master Duel that can only win games by flipping floodgates. But there was a time where Blue Eyes towered over a metagame, and it was the deck to beat. Thank you all for watching, have a fantastic day.